global news beginning from Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia. Thousands on alert in Indonesia's Java after Mount Semeru eruption. 2,500 dead seals discovered on Russia's Caspian coast. On Ukraine war, G7 and allies approve cap on price of Russian oil. Chinese cities ease curbs, full zero COVID exits seen some way off, and global arms sales rise for 7th year in spite of supply chain issues. This and more stories coming. On Sunday, Indonesia's Mount Semeru erupted, covering roads and homes in volcanic ash and prompting evacuations of closely 2,000 residents in East Java province, according to the authorities in the country. No injuries or deaths have so far been reported, and evacuees have been taking shelter in public facilities, including village halls and schools. A statement Sunday from Indonesia's disaster management agencies, BNPB, said. Over 2,000 face masks have been handed out to ease respiratory health risk from volcanic ash, it added. Mount Semeru, which lies around 640 kilometers, 400 miles southeast of the capital, Jakarta, started erupting at 2:46 a.m. local time Sunday, according to BNPB. Indonesia's Center for Volcanology and Geological Hazard Mitigation, PVMBG, said in a statement the alert level of volcanic activity had been raised to the highest level 4. The agency cautioned residents to stay at least 17 kilometers, 10.5 miles away from Semeru's eruption center, adding that volcanic ash had reached as far as 12 kilometers, 7.4 miles from the epicenter. Japan's meteorological agency said the plume from the eruption reached 15 kilometers, about 49,200 feet into the air. The agency said in a statement Sunday there had been no tsunami effects following the eruption. Indonesia, an archipelago of 260 million people, sits on the Ring of Fire, a band around the Pacific Ocean that sets off recurrent earthquakes and volcanic activity. Standing at 3,676 meters, that's 12,060 feet, Mount Semeru is the tallest volcano on Java and one of its most active ones. Over 50 people were killed and thousands more displaced when it erupted last year. People take shelter at a community hall in Kandiporo village following Mount Semeru's volcanic eruption in Lumajang, East Java on December 4th, 2022. Compared to the 2021 eruption, PVMBG Chief Hendra Gunawan said the agency saw the potential for a greater volume of magma from the eruption on Sunday. The eruption in East Java on Sunday follows a sequence of earthquakes on the west of the island, including one last month that killed more than 300 people. The deadly November quake that hit West Java's Cianjur was a shallow earthquake of 5.6 magnitude. A much deeper quake on Saturday in the town of Garut of 6.1 magnitude sent people running from buildings but did not cause major damage. Approximately 2,500 seals have been found dead on the Caspian Sea coast in southern Russia. Authorities in the Russian province of Dagestan said it was uncertain why the mass die-off happened, but it was likely because of natural causes. Regional officials originally reported on Saturday that 700 dead seals were found on the coast, but the Dagestan division of Russian Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment later raised the figure to about 2,500. Head of the Caspian Environmental Protection Center, Zaro Gapnivzov, said in a statement the seals possibly died a couple of weeks ago. He added there was no sign that they were killed or caught in fishing nets. Professionals from the Federal Fisheries Agency and prosecutors inspected the coastline and collected data for laboratory research, which did not instantly spot any pollutants. Numerous previous incidents of mass seal deaths were ascribed to natural causes. Kazakhstan, which has a long Caspian coastline, reported at least 3 such incidents this year. Data about the number of seals in the Caspian differ widely. The Fisheries Agency has said the total number of Caspian seals is 270,000 to 3,000, while the Caspian Environmental Protection Center puts the number at 70,000. On Russian-Ukraine crisis, the price cap on Russian seaborne oil agreed upon by the European Union, the G7 and Australia has come into force. The cap of $60 per barrel, which took effect on Monday, is targeted at limiting Russia's ability to finance its war in Ukraine while making sure it keeps supplying the global market. However, Moscow has said it will not obey the measure even it has to cut production. The cap comes on top of the EU's embargo on imports of Russian crude by sea and same pledges by the United States, Canada, Japan and the United Kingdom. It means Russia oil sold only at a price equivalent to or less than $60 per barrel can be shipped to third-party countries using G7 and EU tankers, insurance companies and credit institutions. Because the world's key shipping and insurance firms are based in G7 countries, the cap could make it difficult for Moscow to sell its oil for a higher price. Countries that do not adopt the measure can continue to buy Russian oil above the price cap, but without using Western services to obtain, insure or transport it. But Russia, the world's second largest oil exporter, said on Sunday it will not accept the cap and would not sell oil that is subject to it. Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak said the move by the West was as gross meddling that contradicted the rules of free trade and will destabilize global energy markets by causing a shortage of supply. Selling oil and gas to Europe has been one of the major sources of Russian foreign currency earnings since Soviet geologists found oil and gas in the swamps of Siberia in the decades after World War II. The G7 price cap, which is agreed upon on Friday, is not much lower than $67 level, where a barrel of Russian oil closed at the end of the day. So the EU and G7 countries assume Russia will still have a spur to continue selling oil at that price while accepting smaller profits. The official said Russia will remain troubled about maintaining the state of its infrastructure, which will be destroyed if production is stopped, and keeping the confidence of its consumers, including China and India. While Russia could be tempted to create its own fleet of tankers operating and protecting them itself, Brussels believes building a maritime ecosystem overnight will be very complicated, and such make-do measures could have trouble convincing customers. The level of the cap is to be reviewed by the EU and the G7 every 2 months, with the first such review planned for mid-January. The cap on crude oil will be followed by a similar measure affecting Russian petroleum products that will come into force on February 5th, although the level of the cap is yet to be decided. On COVID-19 in China, no less than a dozen cities across China have reduced COVID-19 restrictions following a wave of unprecedented protests last month, with Shanghai becoming the last metropolis to scrap tests for public transport and Urumqi reopening malls and restaurants for the first time in months. Shanghai, China's biggest city, where protesters had called on President Xi Jinping to step down over his zero-COVID policy, authorities said on Sunday that residents will no longer need a negative test result to use public transport or enter outdoor venues such as parks and tourist attractions. The relaxing follows same moves by Beijing, Shenzhen, Chengdu and Tianjin, all of which cancelled the testing requirements for public transport on Saturday. In far western Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang region, where the anti-government protests first exploded, authorities reopened ski resorts and malls and permitted restaurants to open their doors for takeaway services. They said cinemas, gyms and parks will also be allowed to open gradually, with restrictions on the number of people permitted to enter the venues. It was the death of 10 people in a fire at a partly locked-down building in Urumqi that prompted the November protests. The city had been locked down since August. Some social media users at the time said victims had been unable to escape the blaze because of the COVID-19 restrictions, although authorities denied that was the case. The protests, which spread over to 20 cities across China, were an extraordinary show of civil disobedience on the mainland since Xi Jinping took power in 2012. In the days since, at least 12 cities across the country have rolled back some of the COVID-19 curbs, according to reports in what officials describe as part of an optimization of epidemic control measures. Wang Ganghua, an expert at the Peking University First Hospital, said, according to report, that the easing of curbs should not be taken as a complete opening up. A According to new data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's SIPRI, sales of arms and military services by the world's 100 biggest defense companies rose to 1.9% to $592 billion in 2021 in spite of supply chain issues that held up shipments of critical components. The increase, accelerating from 1.1% in 2019 to 2020, marked the seventh consecutive year of rising global arms sales, SIPRI said in its arms industry database released on Monday. SIPRI said supply chain issues continued to hold back trade in 2021 and were expected to get worse as a result of the Ukraine war. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 was also adding supply chain challenges for arms companies around the world, the SIPRI report said. For Western countries, it noted that Russia was a significant supplier of the raw materials used in arms production. But Russia, which is increasing production because of the war, is also affected because of war-related sanctions that make it difficult for manufacturers there to access semiconductors and to receive payment for their deliveries. Companies in the United States dominated the list, with sales of 40 U.S. companies in the listing totaling $299 billion in 2021, according to SIPRI. Although sales were slightly lower in real terms as a result of high inflation, continuing a pattern established in 2018, the five firms at the top of the list were also based in the U.S.: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Technologies, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics. But the report noted a large rise in sales from China's manufacturers, with the 8 Chinese arms companies on the list having total arms sales of $109 billion, an increase of 6.3% from the year before. 4 of its manufacturers were in the top 10. South Korean manufacturers also saw above-average growth in sales, with the 4 companies in SIPRI's list reporting combined sales 3.6% above the preceding year at $7.2 billion, led by engineer manufacturer Hanwha Aerospace. Its sales rose to 7.6% to $2.6 billion and are likely to grow significantly in the coming years after it signed a major arms deal with Poland earlier this year. France Dassault Aviation Group also registered strong growth, with sales 59% to $6.3 billion in 2021, driven by deliveries of 25 Rafale combat aircraft. Elsewhere in Europe, however, companies struggled with supply chain disruptions, with most military aerospace firms reporting losses. There were 27 companies with the headquarters in Europe in the top 100. Their combined arms sales increased by 4.2% to reach $123 billion. On more stories in politics, UN delays Myanmar representation decision. The United Nations has delayed a decision on who should represent Myanmar amidst fears that Russia, which has become progressively close to Myanmar's coup leaders, could sabotage attempts to reach an international consensus on the crisis-torn country. The UN's Credentials Committee, composed of 9 UN member states, including China, Russia, and the United States, commenced meeting on November 29th. Under consideration is who should represent Myanmar, sitting UN Ambassador Kang Moon-toon, appointed by the elected government of leader Aung San Suu Kyi, or a nominee of the generals who staged the coup that overthrew her government in February 2021. The committee will submit its recommendations to the United Nations General Assembly UNGA, which generally rubber stamps the advice given. The question over Myanmar's United Nations representation shows the added difficulties facing the anti-coup movement at a time when geopolitical tensions have intensified after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Described as 2 authoritarian powers operating together by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, the split between Russia and China on one side and other parts of international community has broadened, analysts said, and strongman Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping have shown less appetite to compromise. Despite that, the US, China, and Russia will perhaps prefer not to have a public spat over Myanmar's representation, said veteran diplomat and former Dutch ambassador to Myanmar, Letitia van dem Assom. Kang Moon-toon, who remained in his post after the coup, voted this year to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine and to suspend Russia's membership at the United Nations Human Rights Council. He is backed by Myanmar's National Unity Government (NUG), established by the country's elected and now removed legislators. Both Beijing and Moscow have openly backed Senior General Min Aung Hlaing's part regime, even as countries in Southeast Asia reinforced their previously lukewarm pushback against the military. Over 2,500 people have been killed in the military's crackdown since it seized power in February 2021, according to the Assistant Association for Political Prisoners, a civil society group monitoring the situation. According to a Western diplomat involved in the process, the United Nations Credentials Committee had originally agreed to keep Moi Montun for another year. The worry all along is Russia, the diplomat said. Now that the decision has been delayed, critics worry that it opens the door for Russia to pick a fight on behalf of the internationally isolated Myanmar military. Failure to reach a consensus at the committee will lead to a vote at the United Nations General Assembly. In the shores of Africa, flash floods kills 9 at Johannesburg church gathering. Rescue officials said on Sunday not more than 9 people died and 8 others were missing in South Africa after a flash flood swept away members of a church congregation along the Jeski River in Johannesburg. The dead and missing were all part of the congregation, which was conducting religious rituals along the river on Saturday, officials said. Rescue workers reported finding the bodies of 2 victims that day and another 7 bodies when the search and recovery mission resumed on Sunday morning. The teams were interviewing people from the congregation to establish how many others were unaccounted for. Religious groups often gather along the Jeski River, which runs past townships such as Alexandra in the east of Johannesburg, for baptisms and ritual cleansing. Still in Africa, church leads protest against Democratic Republic of Congo M23 rebels. On Sunday, tens of thousands of Christians took to the streets across the Democratic Republic of Congo DRC to protest violence in eastern regions as church leaders accuse the international community of hypocrisy over Rwanda's supposed role in the fighting. Churchgoers in the capital Kinshasa and other major cities after Sunday services heeded a call from the Conference of Catholic Bishops to demonstrate against the conflict with the M23 rebel group, which Congo accuses Rwanda of supporting. The mass protests were the most important since an escalation in fighting in recent months between state forces and M23. The violence has displaced an estimated 390,000 people, according to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Demonstrators in Kinshasa sang and carried banners reading "No to Balkanization," "No to the hypocrisy of the international community, the DRC is not for sale." Many in Congo have for years accused the West of failing to hold Rwanda to account for its alleged role in fueling insecurity in the East. The Europe Parliament in late November called on Rwanda not to support the M23 rebels, but last week the European Commission was criticized in Congo for a decision to give 20 million euros, that's $21 million to support Rwandan soldiers helping fight rebels in Mozambique. At the end of the march in Mutgavulu, protesters sang the national anthem and a priest holding a Congolese flag climbed onto a chair to address the crowd. In August, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said reports by the United Nations experts that Rwanda continued to support the M23 rebel were credible. Rwanda's government has disputed the findings. Anti-Western sentiments were aired in other cities in protests where high-profile attendees included the head of the Senate, several ministers, and lawmakers from the ruling party and the opposition. Congo and Rwanda took part in discussions late November intended to find solutions to the conflict. Other negotiations led by the 7-member East African Community EAC are still ongoing. Finally, on global news, ECOWAS agreed to create regional force against insurgency. West African leaders agreed yesterday to establish a regional peacekeeping force to intervene against jihadism and to aid restore constitutional order in a region that has seen numerous coups over the last 2 years. Leaders of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, have decided to act to take care of our own security in the region, Omar Aliyu Toure, president of the ECOWAS Commission, said during an annual summit in the Nigerian capital of Abuja. Mali, Guinea and Burkina Faso have been rocked by military coups in the last 2 years. The 3 countries have been suspended from the decision-making bodies of ECOWAS. Many countries, including Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and southwards to the Gulf of Guinea, are also reeling with the wave of jihadism. Their national militaries and security agencies have so far been unable to control the jihadist forces operating across borders and have been cooperating with external factors such as the United Nations, France, and Russia. The 15-member political and economic bloc is yet to offer more details on how the force will be constituted, but Warther said the region's defense chiefs will organize next month to map out how it will operate. On Sunday, the West African leaders also told Mali's ruling junta to release by the end of this month 46 Ivory Coast forces it has held since July. Ivory Coast says the troops were sent to give backup for the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali, MINUSMA, and are being unfairly detained. If the soldiers were not released, ECOWAS leaders said they reserve the right and they have taken the decision to take certain measures, but they will appeal and call on the authorities of Mali to release the soldiers. Stay with us for more stories on Zoom on Nigeria. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this time out. You're welcome back. Zoom on Nigeria. We begin with 8 months after Abuja Kaduna train resumes operation today. As the Nigerian Railway Corporation NRC recommences operation on the Abuja Kaduna train service today, the federal government may have lost a whopping 6.6 billion naira to the 251 days shutdown following the March 28th terrorist attack on the train in Rigasa, Kaduna State, where over 10 persons were killed and over 50 others abducted. In a press release signed by the managing director of the Nigerian Railway Corporation, Fidat Okiria, the service will start with 2 return services as follows: Abuja Kaduna DEP/AR from Idu Station, Abuja Rigasa Station, Kaduna, 9.4 hours, DEP 11:53 HPS AAR. He said train service will begin in Kubwa Station, Abuja, Rigasa Station, Kaduna, 10.06 hours, DEP, 11:53 hours, ARR, and Idu Station, Abuja, Rigasa Station, Kaduna, 15.30 hours, DEP, 17:33 H9, ARR. Also, train service will commence in Kubwa Station, Abuja, Rigasa Station, Kaduna. And according to him, the train service will start from Kaduna, Abuja, DEP/ARR, Rigasa Station, Kaduna, Kubwa Station, Abuja. Also, train service from Rigasa Station, Kaduna, Kubwa Station, Abuja, adding that from Rigasa Station, Kaduna, Idu Station, ABJ 14 hours, DEP 16.0 hours, ARR. As part of security measures, he urged passengers to board with the National Identification Number NIN for every adult, valid boarding ticket, adding that no access will be permitted into the departure or arrival hall without a valid ticket. According to him, purchase of ticket by proxy is only limited to minors and specified number of adult passengers. All online and mobile app ticket purchases will be available from 8:00 a.m. on Sunday, December 4th, 2022, stating that ticket offices at the stations will be open from 6:30 a.m. on Monday. Atiku Obi Kwankwaso real out plans to tackle poverty and insecurity. Presidential candidates of the People's Democratic Party, PDP, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, New Nigeria People's Party, NNPP, Rabiu Musa Kwankwaso, and Labour Party, LP, Peter Obi have universally denounced the present poverty rate in the country, saying it's unacceptable considering the nation's resources. The candidates have also identified insecurity as the main cause of the poverty in the country, adding that the state governors should not be blamed for the menace since the federal government is in charge of security. According to reports from the National Bureau of Statistics, the federal government agency recently announced that 133 million Nigerians are now poor, a staggering figure in a country of around 200 million people. But one of the presidential candidates, Rabiu Kwankwaso of the NNPP, said the number could be more. Speaking at the presidential town hall meeting organized by Arise TV, the presidential candidate of the Labour Party, Mr. Peter Obi, said the poverty level in the country was unacceptable. And lastly, on business, remittances to Africa grows to a 53 billion naira in $53 billion US in 2022, according to World Bank. Remittances to sub-Saharan Africa, including Nigeria, the region most exposed to the impacts of the global crisis, grew by an estimated 5.2% to $53 billion in 2022, compared with 16.4% last year, due mostly to strong flows to Nigeria and Kenya. This is contained in the latest Migration and Development Briefs prepared by the Migration and Remittances Unit, Development Economics, DEC of the World Bank. The brief intends to provide an update on significant developments in the area of migration and remittance flows and related strategies over the past 6 months, and also provides medium-term projections of remittance flows to developing countries. According to the latest World Bank Migration and Development Brief, remittances to low and middle-income countries, LMICs, withstood global headwinds in 2022, rising by an estimated 5% to $626 billion, sharply lower than the 10.2% surge in 2021. However, it pointed out that remittances in 2023 are expected to soften to 3.9% growth as adverse conditions in the global environment and regional source countries persist. The Migration and Development Brief said remittances are an important source of household income for LMICs. They alleviate poverty, improve nutritional outcomes, and are associated with increased birth weight and higher school enrollment rates for children in disadvantaged households. Studies show that remittances help recipients' households to build resilience, for example, through financing better housing and to cope with the losses in the aftermath of disasters. According to the World Bank, remittance flows to developing regions were shaped by several factors in 2022, a reopening of host economies as the COVID-19 pandemic withdrew supported migrants' employment and their ability to continue supporting their families back home. Rising prices, on the other hand, adversely affected migrants' real incomes. The bank noted that in countries that experienced scarcity of foreign exchange and multiple exchange rates, officially recorded remittance flows declined as flows shifted to alternative channels offering better rates. To refresh our memories, thousands on alert in Indonesia's Java after Mount Semeru eruption. 2,500 dead seals discovered on Russian Caspian coast. Ukraine war, G7 and allies approve cap on price of Russian oil. Chinese cities ease curbs, full zero COVID exits seen some way off, and global arms sales rise from 7th year in spite of supply chain issues. Remember, continual effort, not strength or intelligence, is the key to unlocking full potential. Thanks for watching. I am Lois Dureki. Have a great day.